welcome to the Vive la France classes for this semester. We're lucky enough to have Dr. Brager be our presenter all the way from Marseille. He lived in New Orleans for 18 years, and he first served as the cultural and linguistic attaché at the consulate in New Orleans from France. He's taught a language and culture classes at LSU and also at Loyola University. He's been volunteering as artistic director of the Francophilia Foundation, and he has relocated to his hometown of Marseille. But he's resumed teaching both English and drama in the French public school system. In addition, he's teaching 2 online courses, one to Loyola University on the history of, on cinema, Francophile cinema, and then also at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell, he's teaching one on French fashion. He's an American citizen for 3 years now, so he's a dual citizenship, and he's more passionate than ever to help the Americans learn about the French culture and also to have the French learn about American culture. So we're very lucky. He's up very late at night right now, and he's ready to give us a wonderful presentation that's going to be on the history of publicité. I need a French person. Okay, thank you, Jean. Does he hear me?
Thank you. Yes, I do. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Okay, so we're going to switch to oh, some people are still coming in. That's great.
Salut Jean.
Salut.
Où sont les cheveux?
C'est fini.
C'est fini.
So I'm going to put this to see if I hear you better like this.
Okay.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Shall I share my screen now? Can I share my screen, Bob?
You can share your screen, but as host, I'm not going to see what other people are going to see.
Oh, well, they'll tell me. I'm going to ask you if you see what you're supposed to see. So let me start this. That's it. Okay, so let me see. Wait.
You're seeing this email.
That's it here.
No. Click on that. You have to click on present email.
Okay, let me see.
Share.
It's on presenters. No,
No, it's not.
there it is.
I see the Art of Publicité, Jean.
Okay, everyone sees the first slide, which is the Art of Publicity, the title. Yes, it seems like everyone is, so that's good. So let me just quickly I need this here.
From the very top of your face.
Oh, here it is. That's it. So I'm going to start. And so I'm really happy to be back with all of you for the first of 3 sessions that are devoted to the art of advertising. It's a topic I've taught actually at the college level, but it's mostly a wonderful way to combine history, business, and art and learn more about France. So I thought that that would be something that you might be interested in. And when Karen was, helping me figure out what would be interesting for the Union Française members, I thought that would be just fantastic. So this talk will focus on visual ads, but it's important to bear in mind that advertising dates back to a long, long time. So when really did advertising come into being? Well, it's difficult to say and to answer. Propaganda, which is the way of selling ideas, is the oldest form of advertising that we can think of, while shouting in the streets is its most prehistoric form. So before even a visual component, there was the shouting and the propaganda industry. The criers walking through the streets were stopping people and passersby at the crossroads, announcing the official acts that were emanating from kings or princes, from the church, or from the brotherhoods. And they were shouting for burials and goods, products, new services in town. They were also shouting for convocations, lost objects. So that already embodied publicity alone. But this is we have a big turning point with François I, in 1539, with the ordinances. After having been published through the sound of trumpets only and public cry, they will be attached to a painting, or they will be attached to a bulletin board. This was the first time with François I in the 16th century that we actually have the beginning of a display. Jean-Michel Papillon is one of the first affichist poster maker whose signature is known, and the first theorist who tries to catalog the iconographic vocabulary of advertising. What is interesting is in the 18th century, during the revolution of 1789, we saw a spark and an explosion in all areas of communication: speeches, newspapers, pamphlets, political pamphlets, of course, in the manner of displaying messages. The amazing industrial development, of course, of the 19th century and the beginnings of mechanization and industrialization, the organization of production, opened a new era that facilitated the advertising of products. Productivity and consumption are really at the roots of the development of advertising. And productivity and consumption, to me, are really the two criteria of the modern economy, which will transform society into a consumer society. So the multiplication of new products resulting from this technical progress, such as, for example, the cycle, the bike, or the nascent automobile, the mass of goods, not only fashion goods, but all kinds of urban goods made available in the first department stores, such as Les Galeries Lafayette, for example, those new temples of consumerism, as Zola would call them, where they facilitated the extension to display an advertising form. To give a concrete example of the ways in which promotion has changed over the years, let's look at the Middle Ages, for example. I like to give this example. In the Middle Ages, the custom was to resort to hanging signs, what we call blade signs, which were the ones that were jutting out from the building and can be seen from afar in the street, given that they are perpendicular to the facade. And those are always being used when you want to give a picturesque or a kind of old world feel to a building. And those were the first signs. Well, for security purposes, those medieval signs were discontinued and replaced during the Renaissance with painted murals or lettering on top of entrance doors to shops, to factories, to warehouses, or to garages, etc. And in the 20th century, you could still see those actually in France quite a lot. In my hometown, Marseille, you see a lot in Lyon. I've seen so many of those letterings. But here again, there was a switch because it was quite interesting to remember that those painted names on the facades were the names of the type of business. For example, if it was a cannery or a cycle business or a garage mechanic. And slowly, little by little, we will have to wait until the end of the 19th century for ads to refer to products and services rather than to the companies that were producing or offering them. So I thought that was quite an interesting way to look at advertising and its evolution throughout the centuries. In this presentation also, I'm going to talk about one of the major ways in which we can analyze advertising. And so bear with me for 5 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about semiotics. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with semiotics. Semiotic is known as the study of signs and symbols and their use of interpretation, and as well as their signifying practices. How do signs work? So in order to understand that, we have to turn to two major figures of semiotics. First is Ferdinand de Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure was a French linguist whose work in the 1900s first produced the theory, the semiotic theory. For him, to make a long story short, for him, a sign is a successful and understandable form of communication. And it can be broken into two parts, the signifier and the signified. So let's look at this little slide. On the one hand, you have the signifier, which is the physical existence of the object of the thing. By this here, I would mean the word pomme in French or apple in English. This is the signifier. If it were some kind of music, it would be the notes or the tune. The signified, as opposed to the signifier, is the mental concept or the representation in reality or in the mind of this signifier. So the fruit or apple incorporation, freshness, happiness, healthiness, the teacher's pet, what we need to eat in order to be healthy. So on the one hand, we have the word, and on the other hand, what it represents. I believe that the best example we have of this rapport between a signifier and a signified is the oil on canvas that we all know by surrealist Belgian-born René Magritte. Ceci n'est pas une pipe. I've always had a lot of questions about this, and I know Véronique, we talked about that a long time ago because she had questions from students also about that. Ceci n'est pas une pipe literally translates, this is not a pipe. So when Magritte actually wrote this underneath the pipe painting in oil, what he meant was, indeed, this is showing that the graphic representation of a pipe is not a pipe. It refers to the object, but should not be viewed as such. So that's what is interesting. You see here the difference between signifier and signified. The second person we need to turn to make sense of how to analyze signs, symbols, words, images is Charles Sanders Peirce. Charles Sanders is an American philosopher who worked around the same time as Saussure, and his theory of semiotics is slightly different from that of Saussure, in the sense that he considered that semiotics is not a relationship between two components, as Saussure thought, but of three elements working with one another. First is the representamen, which is the sign or the signifier, which leads to an object, which is the concept or the signified. But where he differs from Saussure is that he finds a third component to the equation, which is what he calls the interpretant, meaning the created concept in the mind. So you see, for example, when you think of happiness, you don't have to see, let's say, the color pink. You see pink, and pink is the word, the signifier, but the signified is happiness that is related to pink? Well, you might not have a concrete example of happiness. You might just have in your mind the idea of happiness. And this is what he means by interpreting. So I think his depiction of what makes the semiotic equation true is a little bit closer to the reality and how we envisage reality. Whatever the case may be, and because my goal here is to make an analysis easier and not more complicated, I'm going to move on to a few concepts too: the icons, the index, and the symbol. You see, all those words are often used when we analyze images, and that's what I'm going to do with the ads that I'm going to show you guys. But to make sense, we take a look at how the meaning is associated with the pattern. So for example, for instance, the drawing of a pencil is an icon. Why? Because it looks like a pencil. It's physically similar. And this is what we call an icon. As opposed to the index, an index is somehow correlating with some sensory feature to something else. So for example, here we see smoke, which is an index of fire or an index of an explosion. So the meaning of this index is not arbitrary, but is connected through a factual process, which is somewhere there's a fire. I could have given you another example, such as footsteps in the snow. Footsteps in the snow are an index that someone at one point walked in the snow and took this path that we are now on, and so on and so forth. Reversely, a symbol, such as the one, is an arbitrary choice. And by this, I mean that the pattern which refers here to this object is only acquired through habit or norm of reference, such as a play button. We all know this is a play button, but nothing in the design, in the symbol, evokes the actual action of switching on a device or playing a DVD or turning on YouTube or a video. It's rather that we've learned to associate the symbol with the concept. So you see that it's quite interesting to see the differences between icon, index, and symbols. Last but not least, denotation, connotation. The literal or primary meaning of the sign, as found in the case of a word in the pages of a dictionary, is called denotation, as opposed to connotation, which refers to the association of a sign with a feeling, with an emotions, with experience. I was mentioning pink earlier on. Pink, the word pink, spelled P-I-N-K, is denotation. When you move on to what pink refers to or symbolizes, encompasses in all its meanings, then you have happiness, girlhood, etc., etc. Sweetness. So this is the connotation. Voila. So I just wanted to make sure that my explanations were valid. So the signs here are both the title, for example, of this with the signify Jeanne d'Arc. This is the word, the French name of Joan of Arc. So this is, and Sarah Bernard, the actress at the bottom of the poster, or the actress who embodied the Maid of Orleans. The sketch is an icon, right? Because it is a faithful representation of Joan as we know it, with her female hair and a knight's coat of mail, which blends genders. In terms of signified, Joan of Arc refers to French resilience and I would say pride and national pride, one of the strongest examples of female power that French history can provide. So what really would be the connotation of this poster? If you look at the background, if you look at the colors, well, for French people, obviously, it would be that of injustice, with the flames reminiscing that the maid ended up on the stakes, while for British people, the connotation might be completely different. She might be seen as the heroine who is remembered for a bold act of worship, as she relieved Orléans from its siege, and the British people might see her as a bold peasant girl with magic powers, who defied the British army and cost them the Kingdom of France. Personally, for example, my connotation is different. Jeanne embodies resilience, of course, determination, but mostly for me, it is connotated with a lot of work, actually creative work, as I staged the trial of Joan of Arc, as some might remember, in New Orleans. So you see that now that we've briefly explained the terminology that helps understanding a sign, whatever it is, a word, an image, a sound, and most specifically ads, I want to give you a little bit of background of the period I plan to cover today. Today, I'm supposed to cover 1871 to 1914, which is literally La Belle Époque. So what is La Belle Époque? Well, it's a period that occurs during the Third French Republic, and it's a period that we know is characterized by optimism. La Belle Époque, the beautiful era. Regional peace after many years of fight with the Franco-Prussian Empire, as you know, economic prosperity, urban development, colonial expansion, and technological, scientific, and cultural innovation. So a real wonderful era. The Belle Époque was so named in retrospect when it began to be considered a continental Europe golden age, if I may say so, in contrast to the horrors of the wars that Napoleon led, or World War I. That's why it ends in 1914 at the onset of the World War I. Those who were able to benefit from the prosperity of the era were drawn towards new forms of light entertainment, such as balls, masquerades, and the Parisian bourgeoisie mostly, or the successful industrialists, whom we called at the time, or still, the nouveau riche, became increasingly influenced by the habits and fads of the city's elite social class. So the tout Paris, the all of Paris, or everyone in Paris, had the same kind of trends and fads. They would go to the casino, they would be patrons to cabarets, bistros, cafes, and music halls. So this is a beautiful painting here, which kind of encapsulates that Belle Époque time. Belle Époque is also the time of the Exposition Universelle, the world's exhibit in Paris in 1900. You remember this is the 5th world exhibit in Paris. The former ones were in 1855, 67, 78, and 89, but this one saw the birth of the Eiffel Tower, of course, and the manifestation of new currents such as Art Nouveau, Jugendstil, the building of Le Petit Palais and Le Grand Palais, for those of you who are familiar with Paris. The theme of this exhibit at the time was the Olympic Games of modern time that Baron de Coubertin reinvigorated, but it was some kind of an assessment of the century. They were taking stock of the century, and that's actually the subtitle of this world exhibit, Le Bilan du siècle, the centuries, taking stock of the century. So what is important for us to know is the Art Nouveau that developed in art, in architecture, in applied art, especially was a strong influence in the decorative arts, such as poster making. And Art Nouveau, as you know, is known in different languages in different ways. So you talk about Jugendstil in German, you talk about Stile, liberty in Italian, modernism, Catala in Catalan, or many other ways to talk about it. In French, we call it Art Nouveau. And so it was a kind of a reaction against the academic art against eclecticism and historicism of the 19th century architecture and decoration. It was often inspired by natural forms. You can see that floral patterns, curves, plants, flowers, vegetation, flora more than fauna. And another characteristic of this Art Nouveau were a sense of dynamism and movement, often given by asymmetry or whiplash lines. So this is quite interesting because it's going to create unusual forms and large open spaces. The Eiffel Tower, built to serve as the grand entrance to the 1889 World's Fair held in Paris, really took its power during the 1900 World Exhibit. It really became kind of the symbol, an iconic representation of Paris, of the city, of city dwellers, and of its inhabitants for all the visitors around the world. Here is a quick view, of a panoramic view of the 1900 World Exhibit, as you see the Grand Palais and the Eiffel Tower and all the riverboats that were actually giving you a better perspective. The metro also became some sort of a crossroads for interlopers of the city. So many social classes were mixing during rides, and so it became also an iconic presence in Paris. Science was very important. Here you see Pierre and Marie Curie in their laboratory that were demonstrating the experimental apparatus that were used to detect the ionization of air and hence the radioactivity. But science was a big part of this Belle Époque. Musical and cabarets were key moments of this. So let's stop at this wonderful poster by Théophile Alexandre Steinlen, who was a Swiss-born French Art Nouveau painter and printmaker. It was created in 1896, and the poster is quite small. It's 40 centimeters by 62 centimeters, so it's not that big. And it has become the picturesque, the symbol of picturesqueness of Paris, and has been reproduced on all types of touristic items, sometimes to the detriment of the original work, I would say, if I may say, from mugs to magnets to keychains to aprons to scarves of relative quality. If you've been in Rue de Rivoli in Paris, on the poster we note the name of Salis, who was Rodolphe Salis, was the owner and the manager of the Chat Noir. The halo, look at the halo behind, which is very Japanese-like halo, almost lacy in its rendering, includes a war cry that you can barely maybe read. It's adapted from a former war cry, and Montjoie Saint-Denis, and here they say Montjoie Montmartre, as if, you know, this cabaret was revolutionary. So I really like the use of the halo here. The overall aesthetic, as you can see, carries an obvious Oriental feel, and not only with the composition, because there's lots of empty space in this, but also with the font and the smoky parchment paper feel, and most again the lacy graphism of the halo. So here really I think this poster encapsulates the time period, what it is all about, having fun, and the different currents, artistic movements that are inspired the artist at the time. Same thing with this, the frenzy of having fun, but also of mixing social classes. I was mentioning the metro as a hub for mixing. Well, the Bal Masqué, as we all know in New Orleans, were major moments where rich and poor, nouveau riche and former aristocrats or old money would mix under the disguise of different iconic Arlecchino or princesses or devils, also under the pretense of being someone else, but always wearing a mask. So it's interesting. I know masks right now are kind of the things we want to forget, but at the time, it was a way truly to borrow someone else's identity, at least on a Saturday, as they mentioned, for only 3 francs for guys and 1 franc for girls, for ladies. And as you could see, of course, the price were higher for men so that it would attract more women. The last thing I want to say about the Belle Époque is, of course, a few words about the Préfet of the Seine. From 1853 to 1870, he was appointed by Napoleon, the emperor, Napoleon III, who gave him the mission to actually to make the city healthier, safer, less congested, less encumbered, and grander. And he had a plan, and we all know the look that was implemented by Haussmann, the urban development. First, the major thoroughfares, specifically the star-shaped Place de l'Étoile, where the Arc de Triomphe now sits, the sewage system that allowed Paris to finally be clean, and people prevented people from throwing their refuse in the gutter. The apartment buildings that we all know that are typical, with their beautiful gray stone facades, beige gray stone facades, their slate gray roofs, their high ceilings, wooden floors, fireplace in every room. I mean, the typical Haussmannian apartment. The parks that allowed Paris to breathe, because Paris was very congested. And you remember during the revolution, it was very hard to actually control the crowds and the riots. So the emperor never wanted the commune to happen again. So he wanted the rights to be quenched, and that's why he thought that thoroughfares and parks would give a new breath to Paris. And the nightlife, that was the major part that's going to be connected to the need for posters. I love this painting. It really gives us the idea of an 1890s Paris here. And you could see with the beautiful sun, late afternoon sun, the facades, the Haussmannian facades. So what we saw emerge at the time in order to sell the new products were what we call enamel plates. And they were done in such a way that the plates were curved. I'm not going to go into the details. We don't have time about how they were made. But what was interesting is there was a certain way to attach them to a facade, to a wall. And it would have been considered a crime, actually, to steal those. But as you know, a lot of collectors have stolen those, and now they're very costly and they have a lot of value for collectors. Over the years, there have been some good and some bad reproduction of those. But the one that we know the most is probably the bouillon cube, that you put in a soup or in the boiling water of pasta or rice, to give that kind of chicken flavoring. So the good story, so you could see that it was a plug, you could see it was curved, you could see the holes for the little screws. But what was interesting with those plaques, as opposed to posters, were that they would resist weather, bad weather, rain or snow or hail. They would not be easily taken out from the walls, and they would actually become collector pieces when the product was discontinued. What happened to the cub bouillon was that it was popular at one time, but during the Vichy regime, the company, which had been owned by a German and Swiss born family who had been nationalized French, was that trust was the issue, and people started boycotting the product. People saw all kinds of Kabbalistic and signs and within those plates, that the family was actually a traitor and had been collaborating with the enemy, with the Nazi. So the product was boycotted for a while and had to come back after the war in 1947-48. They re-emerged, and instead of their very iconic yellow and red design against the blue background, a lavender blue background, they opted for a patriotic revival, which then was mainly blue, white, and red colors. So it's quite interesting. I concentrated here on the slide on the old design, but imagine that after the war, in order to still be popular amongst customers, they had to change the color. Reminds me of Chanel, you know, or coming back from Switzerland. And a common point they had with the family had with Chanel was that actually left for Switzerland as well. Quickly, I want to go toward the Chocolat Meunier. Yvonne Bouisset is the daughter of the little girl that we see here on the design. Is the daughter of the guy who actually created these design, Firmin Bouisset. And the father really turned to the world of childhood and used kids as a source of constant inspiration in his design. On his plates, for example, for Chocolat Meunier, that I'm sure you've seen before, children looked witty, they are playful, they were often promoting products that were directly connected to the Bouisset's business, which was a family affair indeed. His son, Jacques, was also featured in the eponymous butter cookie commercial, Lefebvre Utile, as is shown in the next slide. You see with his beautiful cape with a red lining, it looks like a little Red Riding Hood with his boots, so much iconic of the era. And I'm sure you've tasted those cookies in French supermarkets. Le is the acronym for Lefebvre Utile. So here we have a little schoolboy, a typical schoolboy, and the label of quality with the mention of Nantes on the biscuit. You know, Nantes, it's in Brittany, and Brittany is known for its crepes, its use of butter in the batter. So it's a rich texture, it's very creamy, it's very buttery, and it's, you know, something that we look forward to finding in a cookie. In some other rare cases, children would actually be chosen to promote adult products, as is the case for Job cigarettes, with the same, albeit unrecognizable, Jacques under his suit-covered face, which to me makes him look like some kind of Dickensian character, an Oliver Twist lost in the streets of Paris. So you see here, he's promoting the paper, the cigarette paper, which is something that would be appalling nowadays. I'm going to now turn to one of the master of poster making at the time, Chéret, who had a very limited education, as a matter of fact. At age 13, he began a 3-year apprenticeship with a lithographer. And then his interest in painting led him to take an art course at the École Nationale de Dessin. And like most other artists, Chéret studied the techniques of various artists, past and present, by visiting Paris museums. He went to train in London, England, where he was strongly influenced by the British approach to poster design and printing. And when he returned to France, Chéret created vivid posters, mostly for cabarets and musicals. So let's have a look. This is when his work started becoming popular, and his large posters displaying, as you could see, modestly free-spirited women, females, found a larger audience. Actually, pundits call him the father of the women's liberation at the time. Females had previously been depicted in art, but they were often seen as prostitutes or as figure models or as being the victims of the male gaze. Here, the women of Cheret's posters are joyous, they are elegant, they're refined, they're lively. A lot of people call them the Cherettes, as if, you know, it was a club. And they were popularly called the Cherettes, not disparagingly. It was not a derogative term. It was freeing for the women of Paris, I think, at the time, and it heralded a more open atmosphere towards women who were able to engage in a way formally into business activities. So they were widely recognized and they were widely seen in those posters and were always elegant. I really like those posters, and you could see the presence of women is always on the foreground, and they are the leader, they're the protagonist. Here, I could see many influences, but those of you who know Fragonard, the Rococo artist, cannot help but think of his swing painting that I will show later on. So here he was actually designing for La Louis Fuller. You remember these wonderful artist who was doing some kind of butterfly dance. She would attach some wooden sticks to her legs, to her arms, so, excuse me, and would actually make movements with silky material. Here's a photograph of the time. It was a highly dangerous venture, given that she was surrounded, in order to have the effect that she wanted around that. She was surrounded by heavy lights, spotlights, and of course the accident happened that we all know of, and Louis Fuller died, burned in a fire. Here's another series of posters that he did. Once again, you know, this ethereal quality of these women who always taking the stage and ravishing the viewer. We have the Folie Bergère here. So what I was telling you is, despite the modernity of the place of women in those posters, we cannot see this in a vacuum, and we have to go back to Fragonard, for example, who inspired Cheret a lot. Look at the face of the lady in this very well-known painting, Le Verrou. This is, I mean, I could go on and literally do a whole presentation on Le Verrou. It's such beautiful painting with, as you could see on the little table, the apple, which is the fruit of the sin, the red curtain here, of course, pertaining to intimacy and the forbidden love. But you could see that the lady is really somewhat refusing the kiss, but also is tempted. So we have this kind of ambiguity in the body tension. And if you go back to the Louis Fleur poster, this is exactly this kind of tilting back the head is so much Fragonard. So I like these, the way in which you could see that despite the clothes, the difference of clothes, you could still see that Cheret directly borrowed from this painting. Here is a close-up. Same thing with this kind of lightness of being, with this swing. It's very clear that by looking at this wonderful rendering of La Balancelle by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, we could still see the lightness. She's losing a shoe as a little Cinderella of the time, while her lover is underneath and is having a wonderful time, obviously. We have the little angel on the statue, which in, if you go to the British Museum in England, in London, is actually, it's been replaced by a more devilish creature. So it's interesting. In France, we have this lightness of being, and in a more Anglo-Saxon world, we have this idea of sin. But no matter what, the face, the pointed feet, the lightness of the hand lines, all scream Chéret. Chéret was inspired by Fragonard. You can see that here in the Fête de Nice. Remember that he lived in Nice for quite a while and was infatuated with the decoration of the floats and the costumes and the creativity of the costumes. Let's move on to the products and services that he covered. He was not only covering musicals, but at the time, electricity became, kind of comfort in modern apartments. And here again, he connected women to technology, which was unheard of before. So this idea that there is petrol, or they're using oil for those lamps, and that some of the houses are going to be electrified too. It's quite interesting to connect a woman, which is, yes, the mistress of the house, but at the same time, they were not specifically connected to the technicality of it all. And I think that that's kind of showing that he wants the woman to get away from the private sphere and also move on to other realms. Here you could see also that in a lot of his promotion of products, such as toys here, les jouets, for Christmas, you have always this world of clowns, circus, puppeteers, which is very much inspired by the spotlights, the skin complexion that the spotlights give to artists on stage. You could see that on the face, almost the Toulouse-Lautrec face, or the Monet, or the Degas face of the woman. You see this glow coming from a low angle with the shadows in the back. This screams performance, stage, nightlife. And this is what you get at the time. Nightlife is so present, even for promotional material that has to do with children. Finally, and to prove again my point, this idea of communication, and once again, the protagonist is a woman. So here you have all the ambiguity of the time, still corseted, still gloves and hats and buns. We are not yet in the Chanel era, but we are getting close to it. In the background, a gentleman with a bowler hat, but still the woman is the connection to communication. So I think this is very interesting. For the travel in region, I told you he spent a lot of time in Nice. So he covered a lot of carnival events. I'm sure you will enjoy. I specifically chose those for you guys living in New Orleans. And you could see that the triangular shape of the composition is very modern. We start with this line of characters, and from the most detailed characters to the shadows that they end up being in the background, but it's still on a line that's very modern. So the fact that Chéret has given depth to its promotional material, those posters, make him a very modern graphic artist. At the same time, you could see that the font and the lettering is very clear. The idea, the major idea being not so much entertaining the viewer, but giving a piece of information that is easily translatable, readable, and legible, excuse me, and that is easily passed on to friends and family. So it's important that we see what needs to be seen, where, how, when, how much, etc., etc. Here I wanted to show you the difference between a non-Chéret poster and a Chéret poster. You could see there is so much more detail and so much more grace and the knowing of the physiology in the body, as opposed to something that is very stilted like this one, advertising for the train from Paris to London with an extension in the boat. He used also some women for the advertising of alcohol, pre-dinner drinks or after dinner drinks. This is again not Cheré, but I wanted to show you how characters then become quite stilted when it's not the mastery of. I think there's nothing like showing good posters and relatively mediocre posters to show you that the difference is tremendous. Here we have another person that is going to play a major role during this time. It's of course Toulouse-Lautrec, that you're all familiar with. You remember that because of his infirmity, he was meant to be an observer. That's what I like about Toulouse-Lautrec. He suffered from being different from an early age, and he was left on the sidelines, so to speak. So he was attracted from his childhood onwards to misfits, to underdogs. So there is no, it's not by any chance that you find in his canvases, in his paintings, circus folks and prostitutes and drunkards and homeless people. These were the people who understand him. These were the people who he was meeting on a regular basis. He was hanging out with. So his parents were actually cousins whose grandmothers were sisters. So there is congenital health conditions here that were attributed to a family history of inbreeding, and this might have caused his infirmity. But actually at the age of 13 he fractured his right femur, and at 14 he fractured his left femur. So the breaks didn't really heal properly, and modern physicians attribute this to an unknown genetic disorder. So all this to say that he was spending a lot of time in brothels, in cabarets, in music halls, in cafes, and this is where he decided to immortalize some of the most wonderful artists of the time. Jane Averill, who was born Jean-Louise Baudon, I didn't know that, but in my research I learned that, was made famous by Toulouse-Lautrec's painting. She was, as you could see, a can-can dancer, and she was given nicknames such as Jeanne la Folle, crazy one, given her acrobatic prowesses. And there was another name that I remember she was given in La Mélinite, which is named after an explosive because of extraordinary energy level. So this poster is so modern. It's so Japanese in a way in its composition, with the empty space, but with the hand of the cellist. I mean, it's just so modern and also so Degas. You know, when Degas has those low angle views, or when Degas plays with the composition and makes us part of either the orchestra or the ballet master as observer of what's happening on stage. This is exactly what you get here. And with the idea of the slant stage, you get a world of fun and unconventional behavior. And I think this is really well done. Here in this wonderful and I would say iconic poster of the Moulin Rouge, we have two characters that are the major protagonists that stand out against the black mass of the observers and the customers and patrons. We have on the foreground Valentin, the flexible guy who could sport a full front split from a jump. If you've been in, if you've attended in the past a can dance in the Moulin Rouge, I'm sure you've seen him. And of course, at the center stage in its white and polka dot outfit, La Goulue. So La Goulue was actually many women in one. She had been a washerwoman, she'd been an actress, she was a figure model, but she was remembered mostly for her audacious quadrille at the Moulin Rouge, and the way in which she would, in her routine, should actually swirl her striped dress for the male audience. Of course, they were all in awe because they could see the heart that she had embroidered in her knickers, and so that's quite fun. She was really the talk of the town, but she is also one of a kind because she could do a high kick and at the same time flip off a man's hat with her toe, which is almost something that you see here in the painting. So she was quite amazing. And she later in her career, when physical damage in her ankles, her legs, and arthritis didn't allow her anymore to dance, she became an animal lover, became in between a lion tamer for a circus, lived in a gypsy trailer, as a matter of fact, in Montmartre. Quite interesting, an iconic image. This one also has been reproduced so many times. I've seen it in so many stores in New Orleans or in Baton Rouge in touristic traps. This is the portrait of a singer, Aristide Bruant, in his cabaret Les Ambassadeurs. And as a post-impressionist here, we can see that Toulouse-Lautrec favored color and shapes, and also developed a technique of spray. He would scratch a toothbrush that was covered with ink or paint with a knife, and we get some kind of wonderful coloring. And you could see that, but the way he masters the color here, the way he uses colors as blocks, is very oriental in its effect, very Japanese too. You all know Alphonse Mouchat in the period, as we've seen, with the Art Nouveau floral patterns, curves, detailed work, lacy-esque, I might say, with this beautiful, almost photographic rendering of female portraits. He worked for products, but he mostly worked for show posters. Here you have on the right hand La Tosca in the Théâtre Sarah Bernard, and on the on the left you have Sarah Bernard in just Manda at the Théâtre de la Renaissance. So you could see this is Klimtesque in a way, or pre-Raphaelite. So you have extreme detail, almost photorealism of the face, and the face is buried in a canopy of a patchwork of beautiful fabrics, from silk, from motifs, from flower patterns, from gold enamels, gold lamés, Art Nouveau motifs. So there is this almost magma and eruption of colors and shapes and forms, and from these forms and colors emerges a face or a hand. And I think this is such a detailed way to magnify the female body, which is adorning her, almost burying her under a plethora of flowers and patterns, but at the same time giving her all its stature, which is, this is beauty. And those posters are absolutely beautiful. I think also which worked, and that was a very modern way, you could see that those posters were long and they were meant to be posted in les colonnes Maurice, you know, those round shaped columns around the city in Paris that serves to advertise shows. I could not select a poster, an Art Nouveau poster, and forget the absinthe, which is the staple of New Orleans. Here again, the green fairy, as we call it, but the green fairy here goes back to ancient times. The way you present it was more like almost as an elixir. She's a Greek goddess, almost rejuvenated by the drinking of the absinthe. So here we're far away from a dark world where the absinthe would lead to alcoholism or dependence and addiction. We are light, it's a light green. We have the floral patterns which bring it to its natural essence. So it's a very smart way to sell alcohol, as if it was, you know, benefiting whoever drinks it. I want to show you the difference of take for the same kind of product and maybe 10 years apart. So on the one hand, you have the Art Nouveau, which is happening, you know, around 1907, 1910, and then 1890, 1886, the absent Oxygène Rose, which is still a very Belle Époque paintings. It's interesting. Also interesting that absinthe was tinted here in order to get away from the idea of the green absinthe, but getting a more pink absinthe. Once again, something is striking. A woman is actually promoting alcohol and not a man. So once again, the use of women here is more like cliche and stereotype, but there is no denying that the woman here is in the public sphere, probably in a cafe or in a terrace at a cafe, and still doing things that maybe 20 years earlier she wouldn't have been able to. Here again, I wanted to show you two ways. The one that I show you by Bouisset with Jacques as the schoolboy, and another way in Art Nouveau to rekindle with the French brand of biscuits and cookies, Le Fèvre-Uti, Le Lu, in a more Art Nouveau style. I'm almost finished, and I want to introduce you to Cappiello Leonetto, who is an Italian painter, an illustrator, and a graphic artist, a poster artist, and he was also a sculptor. As opposed to his fellow artists, he was the first poster artist to use bold figures who were popping out from black backgrounds, or I would say plain backgrounds, which was really not the norm. And at the end of the century, creation was actually running out of steam, and only Cappiello at that time was representing the driving force of French advertising. I really enjoy his stylized drawings. You're going to see it, the character types that he used specific for the Chocolat Klaus. That's the one we really can remember because they're iconic. And his aesthetics are based on the arabesque, on the curve, and also on the flat coloring, which is contrasting with the striking colors that are completely renewing the art of advertising. Let's have a look at Le Frou-Frou, which was a newspaper, a fun news, a newspaper, a satirical paper, Le Frou-Frou. Here you could see the block of color in the back, so detail in the front with the character, very crisp lines, and a very strong color choice in the background. But there is a slide where you could see two of his most iconic work for liquor. You could see there's always a major character, often drawn from circus life, and very clear lettering, sometimes curved, sometimes straight, but always a very attention-grabbing character against a very solid, often dark background. This one is probably the most famous for the anisé kind of pastis drink. Here, what is very interesting is he doesn't shy away from saying that alcohol should be drunk in moderation, with this idea of this devil-like characters, halfway between, I don't know, the chicken, the turkey, or Satan, some kind of pig too. I mean, there's so much phantasmagoric and fantasy work here, but Anis Infernal is clear enough for everyone to understand that you should pay attention to this. Chocolat Class is probably this goddess riding the red horse against the black background, is exactly Cappiello in its essence. But what is very interesting, apart from as opposed to this work, is this creating in the 1931 Cube commercial. I started with the Cube, but I want to go back to Cube here. with the realistic rendering that clashes with former posters, in which a character would always, as I said, start as a pretext for promotion of an item. Here, the bull makes its own promotion, which I think is quite interesting. So the bull is not introducing you to the product. It shows itself as part of the product. So we call this in semiotic, we call this transubstantiation. And transubstantiation is really a way to present both the origin and the content. So here the bull is presenting to you the product and the fact that he is the product. It is the product, sorry. You can notice also that there's some kind of weird and fantasy world here with the fact that the right eye is non-existent and is replaced on the other side by the product. Very refined, realistic at the same time, phantasmagoric, quite interesting word. The last poster I would like to show you guys is this one, again, by Capiello. Éviter les contrefaçons, avoid the fakes, avoid the counterfeits. So here, what we have is a wonderful punny way to use the product to actually promote his own style by saying, don't drink any other coffee than Café Martin. You could read the ad in this way, but you could also read as, I'm the only one who can really fathom such a way to promote a product. So don't try to copy me, which was the case at the time. A lot of people tried to embrace his style, but he was one of a kind. And I think by showing this image full of color, full of lightness, and at the same time telling a story with a character and many references, we can see that during La Belle Époque, the advertising truly became an art with very strong spirited artists who worked just as much as painters and maybe were, for some, more recognized and acknowledged for their fame and talents than painters, because they were really meeting people and customers in the streets, in the shops. It's one thing at the time to be a painter and to be a commissioned work, or to be shown in museums and to be shown in galleries and in shows. Sometimes it was the opportunity of the elite of the tout Paris, as we said earlier, to be able to go to the museum. But when your posters, your promotional posters and your graphic art was actually displayed in the street, it was much easier for everyone to embrace that. And I will end this first series of talk on the art of advertising that by saying that advertising is truly an art. And I hope I made it more palatable and interesting by giving you some kind of pointers, specifically semiotic. Thank you very much. I'm going to end the sharing of my screen now, and I'll take some questions if you have any questions.
If anybody would like to ask a question, raise your hand, which is in, I believe, the reactions button, and I will ask you to unmute yourself. Okay, one friend is the first.
Bonsoir, Jean.
Bonsoir.
Were there any, mute. Bonsoir. Were
Bonsoir.
there any women artists in advertising in this period?
Couldn't find any. When I prepared the course, I found a German artist whose name I can't remember right now, and a Swiss artist, but in the French, circles, I couldn't find any. The closest I would get to was, La Goulue, who was becoming in itself, I wouldn't say a graphic artist, but like she was at the heart of, a lot of posters, but no, I couldn't find any. I wanted to link this, when I was teaching a course on feminism, couldn't find. Maybe Véronique would be would be, Veronique, could you think of anyone that you could think of at the time?
No, you really have to wait the 20th century to see women sort of dipping into the advertisement industry. Women are still in the background. One of the things that need to be mentioned also, technology allowed for all of those images to be made. Printmaking had developed systems of making images, allowing for the colors to flow, as you said, from those very sort of, passages of pastel to deeper colors. So
Right.
that was, technological unavailable before the 19th century. So now actually the artists sort of delve into trying things that were new and different that didn't have today avail. I think at that time, women still remain, if they could, painters, and usually painters behind
Right.
men, a man cover, whether their father was a
Right.
painter or one of their friends. The sort of advertisement industry was just not yet something that the women had. You really have to wait the 20th century and early 20th century, as soon as actually the Russians were the first one with the revolution. As soon as you have hitting 1917, then you have a lot of women coming to the fore and participating into these works. But before that, I can't think
Yeah,
of any.
I'm glad I had the confirmation, because as much as I tried to find one, the closest I got to finding a woman who was involved in the process was les chirettes, that the chire girls, that some were helping him put the different layers when he found a way to have 3 colors on a poster, which was not the case at the beginning. The posters were usually 2 colors, sometimes only 1. But when he found a way to actually have different layering of colors and plates, then for some minute work, he had to find women because their fingers were smaller. And this, you find that exactly in the film industry. You remember, for a long time in the film industry, only women were editing, were part of the editing work, because it had to be done. Film had to be handled, hand by hand. So it's interesting to see that only in the background, only to help once in a while, once in a blue moon, but no names. But excellent question.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, La Goulue, Désarticulé, and some of those figures were so big that they certainly influence the arts, because they were there to, the persona of those people was so important that I think they created, they made the creators created work around them. I mean, Sarah Bernard, my God, she was such a figure. And there was a lot of singers also that you see in Degas' painting, all of those singers that, were very crude in their language, sort of like put things out there that were, we no longer have the text of all of those songs, but we know that some of them were extremely crude. They were really the true personality of the 19th century. I mean, female creators, as well, where the men were, able to present them, to the fore. Yeah.
What was interesting is, my point by drawing those parallels also between Fragonard, for example, on the one hand, and the Belle Époque, is despite the fact that they were still using women, they had changed, their view on women had changed, from just, objects or objects of desire. They were starting coming into the foreground and taking roles. So I think this is a wonderful period to study the beginning, the emerging feminist attitudes of artists.
Yeah, I mean, you haven't shown any of the women. Actually, we see a lot in the 19th century, women smoking, which is a new thing as well. And women actually, they're in bars, they're in different places, and they're actually smoking, as smoking becoming a kind of a liberation representation, or female being more liberated and able to do things that only were reserved to men. And before that becomes actually the the weapon of women as well, in their femininity and their representation and so on. Whereas in the Fragonard pictures, they're subservient. I mean, I often compare Le Verrou, is it a rape or is it a willing participation? And there's a very fine line here. Whereas women in the 19th century, as they are represented in those advertisements, they're more sort of like willing women, strong women presented as such, which is really different from, the, 18th
But I
century.
hope that the presentation helped everyone, dive into all those three, Chere, Capiello, and Musha. I mean, once you get that, you get three different styles, three different approaches to women and, depicting the world around them. And I hope you enjoyed it. I surely enjoyed, despite the fact that, what time is it now? Oh Lord, 1:15. Any other question before I literally collapse?
We have a comment from the group here, which is, it is delightful to see these images that we have seen many of them before, and to hear your commentary and more depth about what we have seen over and over again so many times. So thank you so much, Jean.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I remember, before I moved back to France, I took a small job in a boutique in the French Quarter. And I really enjoyed that work. And it was funny because I was surrounded with those posters, on mugs, on so many things, and T-shirts, and people would still buy it, the keychains, the box, and they're becoming such iconic pieces, but no one knows the story behind, so you embrace those, but you don't really know what the stake was and what was the deal. So I'm happy to talk about it. So next time, the two other talks will be recorded. I won't be live, but I will do the same thing I did for Veuve Clicquot, which is recorded. So you'll have me as a voice, and we'll explore the decades to come. The second talk will be from 1930s to the 80s, and then the last talk will be from the 80s to now. So expect a lot more visual explanation, still using the semiotic analysis. So I hope you'll enjoy, and I thank everyone again for supporting our endeavors to
Excellent.
To share French culture.
Also, we want to let everybody know that if they have any questions, they can email Karen, who sent out the Zoom link, and then she will get the questions to you so you can include them in the next two presentations.
Absolutely, that will be a good idea. I could start, with answering some questions that were asked, and I want to thank Bob for all his help with the technological aspect of it. I want to thank Karen always for reaching out to me to help me figure out what would be nice to present. And it was so delightful to see people and to see that everyone is, at least a lot of people here, that are okay despite the circumstances. So I will see you maybe very soon when I come back to Louisiana, but until then, I will see you vicariously through the second and third talk on the art of advertising.
And this talk has been recorded, so anybody who would like to see it offline can do so.
And it'll be posted on the L'Union Française website. In case anybody missed, if you all have any friends that would like to come to the next two presentations, they can catch up and see this one. It'll be posted shortly. Merci, Jean.
Merci.
Bonne nuit. Bonne nuit.
Thank you. Merci. Merci. Au revoir.
Oops. Salut.